Anthony Nelson, Dean of the College of Business here at Bowie State University. I'd like to welcome you to this President's Forum on behalf of the Sesquicentennial Planning Committee. The forum is part of our Sesquicentennial celebration. Bowie State University has been delivering on the promise of opportunity for 150 years. And this HBCU President's Forum is not only for BSU, but also for other HBCUs to continue delivering on that promise for many more years to come. Here to bring you greetings on behalf of the student body is our Student Government Association President, Ms. Milan Mobley. Milan.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
President Burnham, First Lady Burnham, distinguished members of the Cabinet, alumni, faculty and staff, and our Bowie State University student body. I am Milan Mobley, Student Government Association President, 2014-2015. I must say, it's so inspiring to stand here today in front of so many educators. Just to think that we're celebrating our 150th year anniversary, and 150 years ago, we weren't even allowed to learn how to read. We, the students, appreciate each and every one of your contributions to education, leadership, and continuing guidance. It is my pleasure to welcome you here and thank you for coming to the HBCU President's Forum. I hope you all enjoy. Thank you.
And now to bring you greetings and to introduce our distinguished panelists is Bowie State University's president, who has been president for the last 9 years, Dr. Mickey L. Burnham.
Thank you, Dean Nelson. Good afternoon, all.
Good afternoon.
I am delighted to add my words of welcome to you to this afternoon's forum, which is titled Leading HBCUs into the Future. As has been mentioned, Bowie State University this year is celebrating its sesquicentennial, 150 years delivering the promise of education to the citizens of the state of Maryland and beyond. The Planning Committee thought that this event would be a good activity for an important part of our celebration, which will be a year-long celebration. We are celebrating a glorious past, 150 years. But we must live in the present, and we must plan for the future and prepare for the future. Many higher education institutions are in great stress today. Many HBCUs in particular are in great stress. In fact, it would not be too great an exaggeration to say that the HBCU community as a whole is in great stress. I could name a few that I'm sure you are all aware of that are of great concern to all of us in the HBCU community. I won't name them, but you know that there are institutions facing great trials and challenges. So the question before us is, what must we do in the present? The we includes certainly alumni, faculty, staff. It includes students, and it includes, I think, all people who care about the future of our communities, our states, our nation, and indeed the world. So the question is, what must we do to assure the future of institutions that mean so much to our country, to our world, and its future? And how should Bowie State University and institutions like Bowie State University prepare for the future? These are the questions that I hope will underlie the responses that our distinguished panel will give as you ask those questions in the various forums that have been provided. We are indeed privileged to have a distinguished panel of current and past HBCU presidents to discuss these issues and to answer your questions. Each one of them has a rich and broad experience in higher education, as well as specific experience in HBCUs. You have their abbreviated bios in the program, but I want to add just a bit to what has been printed there. I'm proud to say, first off, that these panelists are all friends of mine. I have known them for many years, and I have admired their work. They bring to leadership great vision, energy, wisdom, and commitment. I'll begin. I'm told that when I introduce them, they are to come and take their seats here. They didn't tell me what order to do this in, so I'll do it in my own order. Starting with Dr. Mary Sias Evans. As you can see in the program, Dr. Evans served for 10 years as president of Kentucky State University. Prior to that, she served as senior vice president for student affairs and external relations at the University of Texas, Dallas. She's a proud graduate of Tougaloo College in Tougaloo, Mississippi, and she has been a highly valued and highly respected colleague in American higher education for a number of years. An indication of that is the fact that she was selected and elected to serve as as chairman of the board for 2 of the 6 presidential associations headquartered in Washington, D.C., one of which was ASCU, the American Association of State Colleges and Universities. The other was APLU, the Association of Public and Land-Grant Universities. So colleagues from those organizations who served on the board elected her to serve as president, and I think part of her service as chairman of those 2 boards even overlapped. But that's an indication of the respect that she has earned and garners in American higher education. Dr. Sias. Next, I introduce the president of Bennett College, President Rosalind Fuse Hall. President Fuse Hall is a graduate of the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and she earned a Juris Doctorate from the Rutgers School of Law. She has worked at a number of different institutions: St. Lawrence University, UNC Chapel Hill. She worked on the UNC, the University of North Carolina Board of Governors, where she was corporate secretary for that governing board for the University of North Carolina system. She worked in administrative positions at North Carolina Central University, Florida A&M University, and now she currently serves as president of Bennett College, one of only 2 women's colleges for African American women in the country. President Rosalind Fuse Hall. Next, I am pleased to introduce Dr. Frank Pogue. Dr. Pogue is a proud graduate of Alabama State University. He earned his master's degree from Atlanta University and his PhD from the University of Pittsburgh. He has served in a number of institutions, but I'll begin with his service in several positions at the State University of New York, Albany, SUNY Albany. From there, he went on to serve as Vice Chancellor for Student Affairs and Special Programs for the SUNY system. And from the SUNY system, he was picked to serve as president of Edinburgh University of Pennsylvania. He served there as 11 years. Distinguished president, great record, so much so that they named a building after him and Mrs. Pogue upon their retirement from that institution. And so Dr. Pogue is one of my colleagues who I fondly say has failed retirement, because he didn't last 6 months before he was tapped to go to Chicago State University to serve as interim president while they did a search for a permanent president there. He served for a year there, as I recall, and then retired again. This time he didn't last 3 months before he was called to go to Grambling State University to serve for a year while they did a search. I think 6 months into that search, they liked the job that he was doing, they recognized the quality of leader that he is, and they asked him to take the job permanently. His wife was kind enough to allow him to sign on for another 4 years, and so Dr. Pogue served for 5 years as president of Grambling State University in Louisiana. And then he retired one more time. This time, he didn't last 6 weeks. Before Cheney University in Pennsylvania called him to serve as interim president while they do a search. And so all of that speaks volumes about his commitment not just to higher education, but his commitment to HBCUs in particular, and I think that goes back to his early days at Alabama State. So I'm very pleased and delighted to have Dr. Frank Pogue to be a member of this distinguished panel. Dr. George Cooper is the 4th member of the panel today. Dr. Cooper currently serves as the executive director of the White House Initiative on Historically Black Colleges and Universities. Dr. Cooper has a distinguished record in higher education as well, has experience at various institutions. He served as president, I believe, for 4 years at South Carolina State University in South Carolina. Before that, I know that he served for a while, I don't know how long, at Tuskegee University. And in his position as executive director of the White House Initiative, he gets to work with the Board of Presidential Advisors, and so he works with presidents from HBCUs from both the private and the public sector. He is a confidant and a colleague and a person that many of us call upon for various things from time to time. His wisdom and experience are just invaluable. So please join me in welcoming Dr. George Cooper and all of the members of this distinguished panel. And finally, I will introduce our moderator for this session, Mr. David Pluvios. He is executive editor, editorial team leader at Diverse Issues in Higher Education. He researches, writes, and speaks across the country on education issues. He holds a bachelor's degree in English from Tufts University, and he told me earlier at lunch today that he took a course or two at Bowie State University. Well, that certainly validates whatever education he has. I had the pleasure of meeting him when I participated in a similar presidential panel at Virginia Union University in November. For this year, they too are celebrating their sesquicentennial. And he did such a great job there. I said if we can get him, he would be just the right person to moderate our panel. And he will have an even better time here at Bowie State than he did at that institution. So David, without further ado, welcome. Thank you.
Am I on? I'll try the podium. Dr. Burnham, thank you so much for your gracious invitation. It is so wonderful to be here representing diverse issues in higher education. As all of you may know, HBCUs are one of our core constituencies, and so it's a great pleasure and an honor to be here. I'd like to thank the great Bowie State University for this invitation. We have a powerful forum assembled here today. I believe we are in for a real treat. I had the opportunity to speak to your distinguished Dean of Business about the motto here, delivering on the promise of opportunity. And this forum promises to give us great insight into the critical nature of the HBCU. In addition to taking a few classes here at Bowie State, I also had the opportunity to work with some of your fine trio students at this institution. And that experience just reminded me about how critical the work that you are doing here at Bowie State and our other HBCUs. Without them, there's so many of our students, I've heard from them directly, they wouldn't know what they would do. So thank you so much for this invitation. And I'd like to just go ahead and get started. We don't have much time, but more time than we had in our last session, Dr. Burnham. So I'm very grateful for the additional time. And I want to just get right into the questioning. Each of our distinguished presidents in advance had individual questions that they were asked. And I'm going to actually ask Dr. Sias to begin. She is going to kick us off with a question about the data. Much of us here have been exposed to lots of information, lots of reports, lots of assaults on the HBCU, both in reputation, both when it comes to appropriation. But I felt it critical, talking with the team here, to have Dr. Sias lay out what is the data telling us about the value that the HBCU is bringing when it comes to educating the most underprepared and underprivileged students in the United States.
Ready?
Please.
Can you hear? Is the microphone on? Yeah. Let's get out of the way before we go any further this question that all of us have heard. Are HBCUs still viable? Amen. The answer absolutely is yes. I always thought that was a dumb question. Because if HBCUs didn't exist, we would have to invent them to do the work that is being done at Bowie and other institutions across this country. HBCUs, both public and private, were established to educate the children of slaves and later a broader population of African Americans. And as it turns out, our doors have almost always been open to everyone who saw the benefit of coming to our institutions. The numbers change, they go up and down, but I'm going to give you some general numbers about where we are and what happens. Because without HBCUs as our vehicle, there was no system in place for educating African Americans prior to the Civil War. In fact, it was prohibited. So when we talk about delivering on the promise of opportunity, without HBCUs, we would not have had the vehicle to be able to have this conversation today. There are approximately, HBCUs are 3% of public institutions of higher education in this country, all actually. Now, the numbers range from 24 to 16.7% in terms of how many undergraduate students, African American students, we graduate. Started at the high end of 24, and now we're down around that 16.7. That's not as bad as it seems, because roughly 1 in every 5 African Americans who gets a baccalaureate degree in this country graduates from an historically black college. That's a lot, considering we're only 3%. Now, what else is important is that more than half of all African American professionals graduate from historically black colleges. More than half of this nation's public school teachers are produced by historically black colleges. Half. That is bedrock mission critical. And nearly 3/4 of all African American dentists and physicians are graduates of historically black colleges. And it's ironic, my husband is not here today because he's going to a celebration for his sister who is a dentist. And she was the first African American woman in the United States Army's Dental Corps in 1971, which wasn't that long ago. A proud graduate of Tougaloo and then Meharry. So when we talk about what we're doing as a group, we are talking about a group of institutions that have produced a lot of people who make a difference in this country. Now, what I found very interesting is 9 of the nation's top 10 colleges that produce African Americans with PhDs, HBCUs, top producers. 7 of the top 8 producers of African American baccalaureates, HBCUs. 16 of the top 21 programs that produce black baccalaureates in the biological sciences, HBCUs. And I know that you all know about Xavier College in New Orleans. Xavier is in rare air in terms of the number of people it produces. It alone produced 90, in 2000, it was over 90 graduate applications for medical school. More than Harvard and all Johns Hopkins, all combined. So they figured out what you needed to do, not just to get the students in, but to get them out, to get the applications done, and to get them successful. So when people say to me, 3%, are you worthy? What are you doing? Yeah, my face looks about like it looks right now. I frown up and I look and I think they really don't understand what it is that we're doing. We produce a lot of quality people in this country. And more importantly, when you think about the black faculty at research institutions, half of those black faculty at research institutions, the predominantly majority research institutions, have their baccalaureate degrees from HBCUs. Now, when you stop and think about where is bedrock, where is home, it's at historically black colleges and universities in this country. So I'm excited when we think about what we're doing. Can we do more? Absolutely. Can our numbers be higher? Yes. But relative to the number of institutions we have and what we're doing, and when you think about the number of mathematicians and scientists we produce, that's where you're in that 40 to 50% range. That's a lot, because if we weren't doing that, how many people of color would you see in those professions? And part of the reason is we not only let them in the door, open the door for them, we motivate, we graduate, and we get them out. Because it's HBCUs that are graduating those students, and they're more likely to go into professional programs and graduate from those programs when they've been at historically black colleges. Now, this wasn't part of my question, but what that says is we do more than educate. Our faculty is doing more. We're motivating those students, and if I had a way and I wanted to be a millionaire, if I could patent what it is we do and put it in a bottle, I would. When I retired, I got lots of phone calls from students who went on to law school, who did things, and there was one young woman that was in an orientation class of mine, and I can remember, beautiful girl, straight A average in math. But every day she came to class with glitter eyeshadow on and her flannel pajama bottoms. And we had to have a talk about that. Now, I'm the president of the university who happens to be teaching freshman orientation. And she thought that she needed to draw attention to herself. And I had to say to her, that's not the attention you need. And the class applauded. She had to understand that her head, her natural intelligence, was what needed to be cultivated. 4 years after graduating, and she graduated in 4 years from Kentucky State, and graduated from law school at U of L in 3 years, and works in Georgia now. I got a phone call saying, I still remember. Now, most people would be afraid to tell you, take that eyeshadow off, take those flannel pajamas off, and don't ever come to class with rollers in your hair and a rag around your head. Yeah. But you have to take the product that you see beyond what might be there, and polish it a bit. Yes. And that's what produces that apple that shines on that tree. And that's what HBCUs do better than anyone else.
Dr. Sires, thank you so much. My next question will be for Dr. Pogue. Dr. Pogue, it's been said in a leadership class that I took that a leader, no matter how effective, has failed if they have not prepared a successor to come after them and build on what they have built. And so the question I have for you is concerning leadership and succession planning. How have our HBCUs been doing when it comes to succession planning? And what can we do better to prepare our future leaders?
Thank you very much. Let me first acknowledge President Burnham and express appreciation to Bowie for sponsoring this event. It's very, very important. I want to congratulate you as well for the celebration of your sesquicentennial. I'm pleased to bring greetings from Cheney University. Now, Cheney is acknowledged as the first HBCU. Now, we have a debate every now and then with Lincoln, right?
No one from Lincoln.
But no, I've met a couple from Lincoln. But you know what? It's all good, all right? 1837. And we were still enslaved, millions of us. And we were being whipped and punished and lynched, even if we owned a book, not whether we could read a book. But a couple of weeks ago, we celebrated our 178th birthday. Dr. Burnham, I noticed on my way in that your van had on it Bowie, the oldest HBCU in Maryland. Yeah? Now, Cheney gives you another perspective. But again, it's all good. For all of the reasons that Mary talked about and all of the reasons that we know about. Now, I was asked to focus briefly on the topic of presidential succession. Everyone seems to know that we are getting older, right? I am. And it's projected that in the next 10 to 15 years, we're going to have a serious shortage of people to step in the leadership role of being president of a university. But one could say the same about vice presidents, particularly provosts, who tend to turn over much faster, and because primarily that's one of the toughest jobs on the campus. So the concept of succession is very important. Succession, if it works right, is a part of the strategic planning process, so that in that planning process. You don't have to guess about how you're going to move forward replacing the president. It's already there. So it is an extremely important part of that. Now, specifically, I was asked to focus on HBCUs. Now, I must be honest with you. It's amazing that we are so successful in finding leaders and good leaders for our institutions. But at the same time, they don't stay very long. And too many of our institutions are bringing generally young professionals into the presidency, and they leave in a very short time. We have not done a very good job in many instances in preparing for those successions. Far too many of us leave in the middle of the night. Okay? You wake up, students wake up one morning, all right, and the faculty say, hey, what happened to him? Well, they didn't see the U-Haul. But it's primarily because of the frequency that leads to disruption of any enterprise when you take leaders out for whatever the reason is. And the only thing I'm suggesting to you is that we have too many on an annual basis of our institutions looking for leaders. Now, the ideal the opportunity to initiate and effect leadership transition is extremely important for HBCUs now as it has been. Here's what I consider to be ideal. There is an announcement of a retirement, of moving on to somewhere, of the sitting president. And then there is the announcement of a search process for a new leader while that old leader is still sitting there. Now, of course, it's time for the old leader to get ready for some parties. All of the goodbyes and receptions and all of those things occur. But in the meantime, the new president is announced. And from the moment of the announcement, the new president has an opportunity to interact, to dialogue with the sitting president, the old president. Immediately that person has access to data, access to the university, access to staff, anything that person wants. Visit the campus and spend time with the person who is leaving. A transition plan, this is what I have done. There is always a transition plan in place so that when the person is announced, the person receives the transition plan that tells him or her, this is where we were 3 to 5 years ago, this is where we are today, and these are the plans for the future. So that you're preparing the person to hit the ground running and keep the institution steady and moving forward. This is very important. It's very important for us because, again, when you have to leave in the middle of the night, it's very disruptive. Now, we have so much in common. Mary has talked excellently about the things we do, and we all know the contributions we make. But you know, we also have to be honest with each other, because we are in serious, serious trouble. There is a threat to our historic mission right now. We are all going through crippling state and federal budget cuts. There are threats to the academic program accreditations, especially if you're in the South, right? Now, there are frequent presidential leadership transitions too often, increasing state mandated admissions requirements, performance measures dominate the air, where you focus on enrollment, retention, graduation rates, job placement, and a little everything else. We are all in public anyway, in state systems one way or the other. Sometimes we have our own trustees, and that can be even worse. But we are all basically working in state systems, and the goal here is to make everybody the same. And HBCUs were never founded to be the same, never founded with the appropriate financial backing, and you don't have it now. In Pennsylvania, while sitting as president of Edinburgh University, I watched what happened at Cheney. The performance measures actually rewarded financially historically white universities for increasing their African American enrollment. There are 14 universities in the Pennsylvania system. And the formerly white institutions were actually rewarded for recruiting the students that we normally enroll. And you know what? The definition changed because Cheney was 97% black. So the definition of minority shifted to being white. And straight away you could see how Cheney was disadvantaged. Most of us are trying to support academic, athletic programs, often at the Division I level, and not a single one of the sports is paying for its own expenses. Mickey, Mary, and I were among other presidents, African American presidents, as we visited the ASCU meetings at least twice a year. And then the African American presidents would pull themselves away because we were concerned that too many of our colleagues who were presidents were disappearing. And we agreed to talk about ways to prevent that from happening, to actually work with a group of individuals on an annual basis for a one-year development program. And it's called MLI, Millennium Leadership Initiative, that grew out of that group that sat together for quite a number of years. It's been extremely successful, primarily because we provide ways to prepare men and women who are ascending to the presidency. And that's really what we must do more of. We must come together to make sure that we support each other in preparing that. We have some major, major issues. Now, Mr. Moderator, I know I'm out of time,
Yeah.
but I'm gonna tell you what, there is one thing I need to say, and my age gives me the privilege to do that. Now, look, we do things to each other, too. Yeah, we undermine each other, too. We don't respect each other often as African American presidents on our campuses. there is a great deal of disrespect. And we don't know how that's hurting us. Now, we gossip, right? We tell half-truth, right? And we will run to media anytime something happens that you don't like. We will go and tell it on the president, all right? Right? But we do that. And I'm saying that it's time to stop that. This backbiting. Look, if we are in a system, that's all they want to hear about us. We are pulling each other down instead of building each other up. Sometimes we are pulling our institutions down instead of building our institutions up. Now, the interim post, you wonder why I'm back and forth in an interim or the presidency. Look, the goal is to do as much as you can in any way you can to stabilize our institutions, to give people coming into those positions a chance, and to give campuses a chance. Now, I have some serious problems at Cheney, right? You do, but so do we all. But if we work together, keep each other in power, and like this activity today, this is necessary. I only wish it could be televised for every one of our young people around the country that's aspiring to the presidency. They ought to be tuned in to what we're doing here today, because there's nothing better than being a president of an HBCU. There's nothing better than that, because you can see the growth, see what you're doing, see the good you're doing. In fact, I sleep good at night.
Hi, Dr. Pope. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And we definitely want to try to keep the time, so I want to move quickly. Dr. Fuse Hall, talking about alumni giving. We know best practices when it comes to higher education funding, higher education operations. We want diversified funding streams, right? We want to see a balance of foundation money. We want to see a balanced contribution of tuition. We want to see a balanced contribution of fundraising. But we know that a lot of our HBCUs are out of balance. Many of them are nearly wholly dependent on tuition dollars. What can our institutions do to better engage alumni to get into this process and support the institutions so we're not always so near the edge of the cliff as institutions?
And that's a great question. I appreciate the opportunity to speak on that, and I also want to echo my colleagues' thanks to my good friends, Mickey and Vera Burnham. They have nurtured me on this path of becoming a college president, and I'm just very grateful that for their mentorship and their friendship. And to the entire Bowie State community, thank you all for inviting us here today. Oftentimes, as Mary has said, we have given so much as an HBCU campus to our students. And yet they graduate and they go on. When I say they graduate into the middle class. They don't graduate back home to the old place, but they actually graduate to a new place. And somehow there is a forgetfulness that to whom much is given, much is required. We know it, but we don't do it. And so that is disheartening. So we need to make a plea always to our alumni at Bennett College, because those are women, alumni here where it's coeducational. But alums have to support these institutions. Because when you think about the founding, 150 years ago, people put pennies and nickels and quarters and the few dollars that they had every year to ensure that books and teachers and facilities were paid for every year. And we have so much more than that today. And yet, in the HBCU community, 10% of alumni give back. 10%. Nationally, it's not much better. Nationally, it's only 14%. And we know that we can do better. We have a couple of key issues. Most of our development offices grew out of alumni affairs. So we have to shore up our infrastructure so that it's not an alumni affairs office, but it's an institutional advancement office. Because the goal of those funds is to advance the institution. You also have to understand when you give it, it's not yours with a string on it. What you mean, Madam President? Well, you know how you give it, and you're gonna pull it down. I'm gonna give it to this, but I only want to use for that. Those are restricted dollars. And what we need are discretionary dollars. I trust you to have the best interest of the college. And so I'm gonna give you this, no strings attached, to use for the best interest of the college. And we've had some colleges to do a very good job with this. Our colleagues over at Claflin are boasting at 43%, the highest two-year average of alumni giving among historically black institutions during 2010, 2011, and 2011-2012. But we like to boast at Bennett College also, since we're so small. Because our participation rate in 2013 when I arrived was 20%. Today it is 27%. We're moving in the right direction. But you have to look at those numbers in two different categories. Not only the percentage of participation, but the amount of monies raised. Now my colleagues down there, and I love Dr. Tisdale very well, but he's only raising small amounts when you look at the second category. When you look at Bennett College, okay, I'm gonna come on with it. We have 7,000 graduates at Bennett College. But when you take out the losses and the deceased members, we have 4,200 good addresses. Not the government address, but the responsive address. And we have over 2,500 good email addresses. And for the last 8 years, the alumni of Bennett College have given back to their alma mater around $1 million each year. When you think about how small we are, and to know that those women are out there giving that, that's the example we'd like to see and offer a challenge to all of our sister colleague institutions to do for their institutions. Now, we also understand that the first step to doing that is you have to have good data. And so part of this infrastructure that has to be built is that you have to have a clean rate. You can't keep people in there so you can brag about, I've got 4,200 alums, I've got 10,000 people I can put my hands on. And you know you can't put your hands on them. We have an 85% clean data rate.
Right.
All right? So that means when we send something out, we know that people have received it. Last week I was down with, we're trying to revitalize a chapter in South Miami. And one of the questions we asked is, do you hear from your alma mater? And the lady said, oh yes, every 2 weeks, like clockwork. I know the first mailing that comes out is to tell me about alumni and what they're doing. And the second mailing that comes out tells me about the college and what it's doing and important events. How about the response rate when you send us a check? Because you know we like to know where our money went. 24 hours. If we get a check at Bennett College, within 24 hours, you are getting a letter back from us thanking you. We keep in contact with all of our donors. If you buy a ticket, you become a donor and a supporter. If you entered our doorways, you become an alum. So we like to say our diversity factor is growing. We have Facebook, Twitter, and good old hard mail. Because we understand that some of our alums like to get something in the mail because the parents, because the daughters, sons and daughters don't communicate with them. So they like to go to the mailbox and receive something hard in paper. We also know that our younger alums, 2000 and younger, they don't even know what a mailbox is. They want to hear about it on Facebook. They want to be able to click in and click down and scroll over. That's what they want to do. So we have that available to them as well. And annually, we do an alumni magazine called The Bell Ringer, which is sent to all alums. It serves as their Christmas card, for the most part. We also have giving societies at various levels to make sure everyone can be involved in this giving. And we use Ruffalo Cody as a calling company to stay in touch. It's also a way for us to make sure and verify we got the right addresses. We net about $200,000 from this calling campaign each year. We also allow our students to get involved. We have a very active pre-alumni association, and we work them hard. And 2 weeks ago, we were identified as the top pre-alumni chapter in the eastern part of the United States. So each class is encouraged to give 1926, because that's when we were reestablished as a women's college. And we have various alum activities for giving purposes. And finally, we also have a 5 for 5 campaign. So on graduation day, I start. Did you enjoy your time? Are you happy today? It's graduation day. Oh yes, Madam President, we had a great time. I love Bennett College. Great, don't forget, I need $5 in the next 5 days. And I need $5 for the first 5 years that you were out. So 5 the first year, 10 the next year. For every year you're out, you need to send me $5, because that grows our giving base. We have wonderful alums that are carrying the torch for Bennett College, but they also are aging. We need to make sure that we are building that succession plan of the next group and generation of givers. And we start on the campus on the happiest day of their lives, saying, remember this day, and give like that.
Dr. Cooper, there were high hopes in the HBCU community when President Obama took office. It's interesting, going to the last several HBCU week conferences, it seems that we've had a decline in enthusiasm. There's been a lot of concern expressed. We know about the PLUS loan situation, but now we have the college framework for ratings. We have the community college initiatives. It seems as if the community has expressed concern that it has not been thoroughly consulted. HBCU concerns have not been properly taken into account by this administration. So the future for many looks dark. Given the federal government's directives for higher education to be more accessible and accountable, what are the implications for HBCUs? And what can HBCUs do to get at the table in a more direct way?
Thank you for the question. Very interesting question that you're asking about the commitment of the Obama administration to HBCUs. What I've heard President Obama say is that HBCUs must not only survive, they must thrive in these times. If we look at that and we look at federal funds that have been made available to HBCUs, Pell Grants have increased. We have the largest awards under Pell Grants than in any year prior to President Obama coming on board. And if we understand the importance of Pell Grants to HBCUs, we know that those funds are stable. So we're up to about $1,000 to $5,073 per student. We also recognize that for 3 years, Pell Grants were given for the summer, but there was some negotiations with the legislature as to whether or not that should be sustained. It has not been sustained, but there is an effort now to make sure that we find ways to replenish Pell Grant funds to support students who receive Pell Grants to attend HBCUs. About 77% of students who attend HBCUs receive Pell Grants. If we look at this increase, then federal funds are increasing, but what we recognize if we look at all institutions of higher education, including HBCUs, and we look at the last 10 years, there's been approximately a 28% reduction for those state HBCUs. So it means that states have not come to the table to provide support. So when you say that the president is not speaking our ways, it does not describe his commitment to working with HBCUs. We did have some conversation, I guess I've been on board for a year and a half, so we had some conversations about the PLUS loans that were available to students, and we realized that over a 5-year period of time, there was I guess a plan made to change Pell Grants awards to institutions. But PLUS grants did not change that much. They sort of went down because there was not a change, but we had 2 HBCU presidents, the president of Benedict and the president of Miles College, who came to the table to rush through a negotiated rulemaking process that allows us now to make PLUS grant funds available with a quick response to the requests as made by parents and graduate students. On March 29th, the process will change, and there will not be a wait or delay for parents and students who are making the request. They can have about $2,800 debt. If it's not more than that, they are eligible for the PLUS loans, and it makes those funds available immediately. Another challenge that higher education faces is that many of you have heard about the college rating system. The college rating system was a concern to HBCUs because we thought that in the college rating system, we would be rated with all institutions, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and not really fare well. But what the administration wants us to recognize is that we're looking at a ranking of institutions, not rating of institutions. And rankings really respond to our ability to carry out the mission of our institutions. So in the ranking system, we're talking about access, affordability, and outcomes for students who choose to attend our institutions. So if that happens, then we are looking not at a ranking, but we're looking at those institutions who have used their presidents and their faculty to look at how we evaluate high-performing institutions and low-performing institutions to determine how they're spending resources and the impact of those expenditures in allowing students to make the right choice for attending an HBCU, to understand what it costs to attend those institutions and what happens as an outcome that HBCUs have on the life of these young men and women who play a major role in contributing to their state's economy, which means that we have an economic base that's important. What our president realizes is that for the United States, we're ranked 12th in the world in terms of the ability to produce undergraduate students to be competitive for our nation. And what happens in this case is that we are not really competitive. We're bringing students from China and from India and from Africa because we fall short of making this happen. So if we look at the rating system that's being utilized, it's not a threat to HBCUs, but it's an opportunity for us to respond and show that we're accountable for the federal funds that are invested in our institutions. So this system will impact all institutions, not just HBCUs. But if we do a good job of being accountable in spending our funds, then it puts us in a position of garnering those funds that the Department of Education provides in supporting HBCUs. So while we may not talk to the president all the time. I can tell you that he is committed to providing opportunities for young men and young women to attend HBCUs. And what we are doing is looking at data that we already send to the Department of Education to determine how we're responding. So when that data comes in, we're looking at IPED data, we're looking at NSLD data, which talks about national student loan data that is reported, and we're looking at earnings information that comes after students graduate from our institutions. So when they graduate, we're preparing them to compete for jobs. They're earning because of the experiences that we continue to provide at HBCUs. So that, I think, is a reflection of how this administration looks at approximately $150 billion that goes to support students who choose to attend higher education institutions, and the 311,000 plus students who choose to attend HBCUs who are depending on the federal funds needed to be successful and to graduate. So when we look at the standards that President Obama has been talking about since 2013, he's brought HBCU presidents and other presidents to the table to say, what can you do to help us assure that students will earn a degree and graduate from all institutions, including HBCUs? And one of the things that I do in the position that I have now, I look at all federal agencies and what they provide to institutions of higher education and what goes to HBCUs. And that becomes very important when we look at the return on the tax dollars that are invested. So we generate about 2.8% of the funds awarded to all institutions of higher education in the United States. I talked to my President Board of Advisors, and one of the things that they would like to see happen is that we should have an aspirational goal of about 5% to federal agencies, which gives us an opportunity really to see our funds grow and not only support academic programs, but research and outreach programs that give us the strength that we need to be successful as HBCUs. So sometimes we miss the mark. I think it would be great to have a conversation every day, but the purpose of the college rating system is to help colleges and universities measure performance and improve performance. And if you look at HBCUs over our life, we've always been accountable for funds that we receive. There's no free money. So if you demonstrate that you can measure and benchmark and improve and let parents and students know what they get in return for the investment they choose to attend our institution, that's the return. And that gives us an opportunity to maintain our position in the college rating system. We also want to talk about the information that we give to parents and students as to why they should choose our institutions. So most parents and students go to 3 or 4 institutions, right? And even among HBCUs, you may visit 3 HBCUs before you choose which one you're going to attend. And I met 5 students from New Jersey who are on campus today, and that's one of the things that they're doing now. So they're visiting 3 HBCUs this weekend, and they'll make a choice as to which one they're going to attend. And since they were on Bowie's campus, I use it as a way of letting them know the value and the return on the investment that they choose to attend Bowie State University. And the final thing is that when we look at the data that we're submitting to the Department of Education, it gives us an opportunity to submit reliable data that describes what we do as institutions. And if this data is reliable, then it demonstrates to us through this administration that we are making a return on the investment for parents and students who choose. And for students who graduate, they're gonna graduate with a degree. And this degree is really going to put them into a position of being a part of a community and also paying back loans if they have loans for the funds that they receive at HBCUs. This administration has also created a low loan rate for students who have attended HBCUs. You only have to pay 10% of your loan based on your income. So it's seeded to determine that this administration and the president has made a commitment to help students who choose to attend HBCUs.
Thank you so much. Dr. Poe, my next question is for you. You mentioned, and we talked about turnover. It is said that it takes about 5 years for a president to actually be able to implement any strategic plan. And you talked about the revolving door with HBCU presidents. And my question is directed to you, but also other members of the panel. Are we too quick? You know, I'm thinking about, we see what happened with South Carolina State recently. The president came out and said, listen, you push me out, we're gonna be set back. We know that there's a lot of reactionary, decisions that are made. Crisis comes, president is out. Are we too quick to turn on the president? You mentioned the president leaving, but a lot of the times we know it's the Board of Trustees saying, you know what, crisis is here, you've got to go. Are we too quick to give up on our HBCU president? And what do we need to do to stabilize leadership in terms of longevity with our presidents?
Well, obviously a very good question. I'm surprised, though, that you use 5 years because, for the most part, I know too many of our presidents, particularly in HBCU settings, after 1 year, they kind of know if they're in or out of trouble. It doesn't really take that long. In fact, I'm convinced now that inasmuch as we tend to blame the president for everything, regardless, trustees blame the president. Alumni, who, by the way, if they give 50 cents, they want to run the place. But when they run into trouble, the institution runs into trouble, they blame the president. That's first. Current students often blame the president, right? And if you're in a system, I mean, yeah, you are doubly blamed if something happens on your campus because the system does nothing for the most part to protect the presidency in the first place. So it is a rarity, increasingly so, because you are underfunded, period. Your enrollment is going down, period, because of the competition. Integration came, right? Integration came. And now, you see, when integration came, you can go back to 64 or whatever, and the moment that happened, the thought was that we don't need HBCUs anymore. And here we are today trying to convince the world that we need HBCUs today more than any other time in our history because of no other reason. We're the fastest growing population, people of color. The other thing is, as Dr. Sias pointed out, we have demonstrated, in Cheney's case, 178 years, we have demonstrated that we know what to do. We know how to bring people in, we know how to pat them on the back, create a student-centered environment, encourage them to do their very best, nurturing them, supporting and friendly and all of those, trusting us and all of that, to get them out, okay? Now, but you still have, again, the challenges that are there today can make it almost impossible to manage many of our institutions. It becomes impossible. But the president goes. In walks a new president. And you know what people do? They will say, well, we got rid of him. Now it's your turn. All right? And now we're going to see what you can do. And then they just sit back and watch you fail as well because they're not going to change. The culture of many of our institutions is so fixed that it will take 5 to 10 years to even try to modify the culture. But you're rarely given that time. And again, when I talked earlier, the importance of working together, the importance of stabilizing our institutions, and realizing, ladies and gentlemen, We don't even have the black church anymore. Look, the HBCUs is all we got. That's it. This is our history. And if we close those institutions, merge those institutions, continue to dismantle those institutions, we weaken our sense of history. And so my approach always is to try to get people to work together. And I'm convinced that what we need to do, because these typical consulting firms, and I'm one of those firms, but they don't always understand HBCUs, and they don't understand what our institutions need. And so they just go about their business in a typical kind of way. But if we come together, like why I mentioned MLI, right? MLI, the Millennium Leadership Institute, that functions in the interest of all institutions, but functions definitely in the interest of HBCUs and African American presidents, minority presidents. So, but I'm still of the opinion that we need to look to places like ASCU or ACE or any of the other national organizations to focus special attention on the needs of HBCUs. We are members of those organizations. And as members of those organizations, I think we need to take a little time out. You hear that, Dr. Burnham? a little time out and say, hey, let's, at one of our conferences, let's spend a whole session on the needs of HBCUs, where they are today and those needs, and how we can be very helpful. And I know ASCU works with MLI. In fact, ASCU is MLI. But a focus directly on the needs of HBCUs. If you want to add women, that's fine. If you want to add Hispanics, that's fine. Gay lesbians, that's fine. But HBCUs must receive that kind of support and attention.
You know, I want to ask a follow-up question, and I'll let Dr. Fusehall jump in. The other concern and other question I have, we look at what happened with South Carolina State recently. We talked earlier about this issue of duplication. One of the conversations I had was that the trouble that that institution is in, and many others, is a direct result of being starved at the vine when it comes to state appropriations. We talked about whether some of our state legislators have even been on the HBCU campus, right? Where is the support? It is not there. My follow-up question is concerning the state dynamics and how that's impacted leadership. But Dr. Fusehall, I think you had a follow-up concern, one you addressed concerning the issue of too quick to give up on our presidents.
Yeah, too quick to give up on our presidents. I wonder, I echo everything that Dr. Polk has said, but I wonder sometimes if our alums and our governing bodies understand that every time you change, you start anew with those supporters and donors that give you substantial funds.
Correct.
When I came into this office 19 months ago, the entire first year, I went around and the constant comment was, we don't give to interims, we don't give to new presidents. We don't give to interims, we don't give to new presidents. Now, take Dr. Polk. He's been an interim, and wherever he was, that first year, so that's 2 years of school, did not get support, major support. We have to look at these changes, not so much for the small, well, I gave them 50 cents and I told them to start this program so my daughter could have a major that I wanted her to have, and they didn't do it, so now I'm gonna go out and talk to the media and tell them everything and get this president out of here. Sometimes our tolerance level for a mistake, which happened, or an incident, which happened, is so small and short that we forget about the overall impact that we're having to our institutions. Now, if you look at some of our institutions who would take 10-year span, if you've had 3 presidents in a 10-year span, then understand you've had at least 6 years of no support. That's without the state withdrawing any support. That's without alums walking away. No support. What does that do for us? The second point I want to say is about the governance piece. A lot of people want to be on the board of trustees so I can get CIAA tickets. I know I had to manage that for a school. That's not the role of a trustee board. Trustees have 3 roles. They are to advocate on behalf of the college and university. They are there to support the president. And they are there to bring information and take accurate information back to their constituencies. That's the 3 roles. The Association of Governing Boards is one of these groups that we all belong to. There used to be one campus that went consistently, Delaware State University. Whenever I would go as a member of the Board of Governors, and we would take, the Board of Governors of the University of North Carolina would proudly take 13 to 15 of their 32 members every year of the Board of Governors to the AGB conference. Because they wanted to learn what governance is, what other people were doing, what the key questions were. They wanted to learn. Trustees have to learn their jobs. They don't know the jobs just coming in because I went to school there. That's not what governance is about. It's about structure, and it's about supporting the long-term mission and goals and strategic plans of the college, and supporting it through changes in administration, because the institution is still the same institution. I'm so happy that 2 weeks ago, AGB did a HBCU Presidents and Chairs Forum for 1 week with one group, with a smaller group of us, and the next week with another group. And I can tell you that the University of North Carolina, Tom Ross, the president of the system, went and he took every one of his 5 HBCUs in the system to participate in this. This is vitally important. This is the role we have to play. And please, if you want to be a trustee, invest in doing the work and educating yourself about what it means to govern an institution with a long-term view.
You know,
Anybody else
let me,
quickly?
I know, I just need to mention something that Dr. Burnham mentioned to me once. See, I spent 42 years serving on historically white campuses before returning to an HBCU. And when we used to sit around the table as black presidents of ASCU, I would have all of these recommendations and solutions. This is the way to get it done. You know, one day, Mickey Burnham looked at me and he said, "Frank, you don't know nothing." he said, "You don't know anything. Look, working at an HBCU is very different." Sir, you were right.
You know, my next question is, you know, there's a situation now where in Maryland, the HBCUs have had a finding in their favor concerning duplication. And now a settlement is under negotiation. But in conversations with the team at Diverse, we've noted that in the past, HBCUs have gotten the short end of the stick. Instead of a program, they might have taken the money. When it comes to being strategic about being aggressively postured in claiming their space in a particular program, or being aggressive with partnerships, I'm thinking Tennessee State has a great partnership with Boeing where they're doing their cockpit. What can HBCUs be doing to be more aggressively claiming their space? We know that in this era, it's the niche that really allows a school to move to the next level. What can our HBCUs do to be more aggressive about claiming their niche, i.e. for a program, but also for a partnership in order to be sustainable moving forward? And I'll ask Mary Sayers to jump in there, please.
Well, I think we underestimate our potential of what we're capable of doing. And so as a result, we don't go actively out to recruit those partners. But we have to start doing that now. We have to understand, a couple of years ago, when I was the chair of the board of APLU, there was a white paper we did about creating a virtual university for HBCUs. We might not all have the skill, the faculty we need to do every program that we think is a new, good program that would attract students, but across our institution, we have that skill. What would stop us from creating that virtual institution? Where we look at where we have those skills, we pull those people together, but it's, I won't even say out of the box, because it's an uncomfortable zone for us. But we gotta move there. We have to be able to do that. We also have to go out and make sure, whether it's the Toyotas of the world, or the Boeings, or whether it's hospitals and medical care, we need internships. We need to get our students out there. When people see your students and see your faculty, they will come back to work with you. What they have is a lack of information, and that is on us. We have not done as effective a job as we need to in telling our own story.
Amen.
We need public service announcements. We need a comprehensive video that talks about what we do and do extremely well, because most people don't know what we're capable of doing. Those public service announcements, having stories about what our students and alumni do, showing the research that we do, and the other partners that we need, they're not just corporate partners, partnering with other institutions, whether they're historically black colleges and universities or other institutions within our state or region. Let us get in, get the money, not the short end of the stick, but be the lead to get that money. And if we can do that and do it consistently, partnerships are critical. Strategic partnerships are essential.
Amen.
Now we want to give time for our audience to jump in here with some questions. And I know that there were some that are pre-prepared. I believe Cassandra was going to help me with that. But before we do move forward with some of the pre-prepared questions, I actually want to now turn over to our great audience here. You've heard our presidents talk about both the challenges and the opportunities of the HBCUs. Now is the time for some of the questions. Here they are. The first question, I'll go ahead and do this and then I'll throw it open, from the audience is concerning veterans. And with my work at Diverse, I know, and we know, that the veteran population, when it comes to funding, they are supported financially, but they need all kinds of other support to get in, to persist, and to finish and make that transitions. What programs and initiatives have shown success at any of your campuses in dealing with the specific needs of the veteran student?
Okay. The first thing you need is a strong VA advocate. And you have people on your campus who might be your director of Veterans Affairs, but having a person in place and not knowing what that person's skill levels are is critically important. If you don't have the right person, you need to be able to go back and look, because the veterans are coming out and they want answers, and they want them now.
No.
They don't want them 3 days from now or 3 weeks from now.
Yeah.
You need peer advisors to work with them, people who have been in the military, who understand. And when I say everything is right now, that's an understatement. It's an understatement. As a president, I got involved in, because the first thing that happens is if you don't respond immediately, and immediately isn't 24 hours, it's I want to answer before I leave this office. So you got to have someone who knows and who understands. And the other part of that is making sure that we follow up, that we have, this one will not sound strange, but I had to increase the number of counselors I had, not just academic counselors, you need that as well. And we had to have some especially for veterans, because how they learn, how they want to be talked to and treated is different. But you also had to have more counseling in your counseling center, because they come with a boatload of problems outside of the strictly academic ones that will cause them not to be retained if you don't handle those problems. So it's a costly function when you're dealing with veterans, and more of us have larger veteran populations, even at small schools, but we have to be fully prepared so we can graduate those students.
And I would only add that we are still under-enrolled at Cheney. And by that, our enrollment was approximately 3,000 students at one point. And now we have about 1,012 students. And we're trying to bring that enrollment back to 3,000 over a period of time. We're talking a lot about veterans, right? I mean, in terms of the reality that they are there. And you're absolutely right. They want to be served now, immediately, as well as they should be. Yeah. So we are in the process of planning to expand an outreach in that area.
One of the things about veterans also is that at HBCUs we have strong ROTC programs. And even though we hire counselors and people in financial aid and academic advisement, our alumni come back as a strong group to make sure that we look beyond those traditional students who come to our institutions. And they have one-on-one relationships with young men and women who we can move quickly to respond to make sure that they complete their degree and graduate from our institution. So that, I think, has been a historical role and commitment that alumni at HBCUs continue to support as they look at the challenges that we face in bringing veterans into our academic programs and providing support not only for them but for their families also.
Those advocates are critically important. No one wants to be bounced from financial aid to the registrar's office, so you have to have someone who serves as an interface. So when you have problems, you can get together and have a sit-down about how to resolve those problems. That works extremely well.
Another question that came from the audience, given Apple's new $50 million commitment to HBCUs, the question is concerning how should HBCUs use funds to prepare students across disciplines. But I want to amplify this question with a statement that Dr. Pogue made concerning the HBCU's use of resources. You mentioned, Dr. Pogue, the effort to support athletic programs that are not making money. We know our majority institutions, they have at least two, a lot of times, that make money. You know, the basketball, the football, and we have at least overall, it's not a major drain on the university's resources. And so the question is, we see this money that's coming from Apple. How should this kind of money be best used? And what do our institutions need to do when it comes to strategic planning, looking at what is truly important when it comes to staying viable when we're looking at how we're budgeting?
Well, you first have to identify that as one of your major goals, and then you get people behind it. This is something that alumni can help you with. But also, again, the role of a trustee can help you with in terms of outreach. But you identify pockets of individuals who can assist you with accessing Apple's money. Now, I'll tell you one thing. I don't know, frankly, I don't know of an HBCU that can brag about athletics, especially in terms of Division I and supporting athletics. I can talk more about institutions that are considering dropping athletics, especially sometimes even football. Basketball, the more expensive operations that are running. because of the budgetary or the competition for dollars. And the bottom line is that we are taking the resources from the academic side often to support athletics. And this is a serious question, but one that even speaks more directly to accessing, how much you say?
50 million.
50 million. Reaching out to make sure that we can get alternative funding, especially to support the academic piece. Then perhaps we get more funds or use the fund in a different way to support athletics. But I can only tell you right now, there are just things we don't have at Cheney, and even at Grambling, known for athletics in different ways, especially football. But there are just things we did not have there. Alternative funding would be great. I'm going to look into the 50 million.
That's all.
Let me help you out. So the 50 million has already been designated to Thurgood Marshall. So if you're a Thurgood Marshall member, you can get access to it. So that to help with diversifying their workforce for underrepresented minorities as well as women. So since my institution is not a Thurgood Marshall school, I sent an email immediately as soon as that came out to the Women's Coalition that I do belong to say they're also looking at women. Who do you all know at Apple to begin to talk about? Because you're right. The person that's going to make this decision about where that 50 million goes and over how much, to whom, over how many years, is either going to be in the C-suite of the corporation or in the foundation. And so I've already started looking at who is on their board, and on Monday I'll be saying to my board, who do you know that's on this board that we can talk to at Apple? Intel has done the same thing about a month ago. Reverend Jesse Jackson announced that big multi-million-dollar partnership with Intel. Intel has already got 5 schools that they're working with, okay? None of them are the small HBCUs. None of them are the liberal arts HBCUs. They're looking specifically at those programs and those colleges that have large science, robust science programs. Like, I know North Carolina A&T is in there. So I picked up the phone and called Harold and said, when you get your Intel money, remember they also want women, and so you need to come across the street. Those are the kinds of things we have to do, working with one another, because it is a couple of things like Dr. Pogue said. One, and Dr. Syed said, one, we have to make sure people know that we're interested. And two, we have to let them know we were doing science for women in the 1930s and 40s at Bennett College. But I also know that when I look in my computer science department, I have 1 faculty member. And we've done an academic program review, and when I look at the last 5 years, we've had 2 graduates.
All right.
Dr. Cooper.
You know, when you look at investments that come from corporate America, and we just use Apple as a model, and they give $50 million, it's not to work with every HBCU. The challenge is if they work with one of the advocacy groups say, here's what we want to strengthen. It could be computer science. If you make the investment, these are the institutions that are going to be a part of the conversation and a part of the use of the resources. So when you look at this, then there is no free money. There's an agreement, there's a business plan written, there are a series of objectives that are stated, and once you make that, then they're expecting something as a student internship, ability to employ students. They may look at faculty development experiences in Apple that would allow institutions to grow and to be more responsive. So the question is, what are your strengths? How do you leverage those strengths as federal agencies or foundations or corporations to say, if you make this investment, here's what we're able to do for our institutions, but here's what we're able to do for you. And I think when you get those mutually beneficial agreements, then you get money. So that helps you build capacity. And what you do is, will this capacity allow you to grow your program? If you grow your program and increases enrollment, increases the number of graduates, it demonstrates that internships will be responsive to this organization. They share that with other colleagues, and they come to the table to leverage the resources and the return on investment that the capacity at these institutions has developed over time. So I think you have to look at that as there's no free money. You state the goals and objectives. You say, if you make this return on your investment, here's what we're going to do for you. And here's what that does in leveraging our students to provide opportunities for those students who choose to attend my university, but will be employed by you.
This question is concerning the economy and how HBCUs need to respond to how it's been changing. One bit of news that caused shockwaves in the higher education world was the announced closure of Sweet Briar. And the question is, in unstable economic times, can HBCUs lower their costs and still provide quality academic programs and excellent professors? And my amplification to this question is, we know what's going on in terms of the economy. We see that schools now, with escalating tuitions, at some point we're reaching a critical mass where we have less students willing to pay top dollar. And so we have peril for many of our institutions, but there's peril and there's also opportunity, I think, for some of our institutions to step in. And so I was wondering if you could talk about the potential for the HBCU to step in and add that value for the student that really wants to get the bang for their buck.
Can I just start there, because I'm the only person up here that has been doubly affected by this announcement, because I'm an HBCU and I'm a women's college. And when I tell you that it just shook all of us to our core to have them send that message out that they were closing at the end of this summer. I was on the line yesterday with some women colleagues from other women's colleges. One thing we want people to know, they are not closing because they are a women's college. They are closing because they had a poor business model that did not adapt to the changing landscape, particularly since 2008 with the recession. One of the things that my board has asked me to do is to bring a new business model to the next board meeting. And that's what we've been working on for the last month, is how do we tweak our business model so that we are responsible, as Dr. Cooper was talking about, and accountable for the things that we know are coming. This college rating system is coming. It's going to happen. So how do I now become a driver of those factors that they're going to be looking at, as opposed to being victimized by it? Nobody's going to give me money for bemoaning the fact that my graduation rate is below a certain level, my retention rate is below a certain level. So I have to go out and find sponsors to help build capacity to address those particular criteria first and foremost, so that then in 2 more years when they decide to change them, I will be in a position that I can say, but I stand firm in the middle, because I can't get to the top from where I am right now, but I want to make sure that I'm firmly in the middle. Middle usually doesn't get, the outside edges get eaten up. Okay? Until I can get to the top, because I'm going to the top. And there's no mistake about that. We're going to the top. But that was not a women's college issue. That was a business plan issue. We do have to be responsive. We do have to find alternate funding streams. And we do have to come with bold vision about different ways of meeting the needs of society, because that's the expectation for higher education now. It is no longer go and get a college and learn how to transition from being a child to an adult. People want to know, for the $27,800 I'm paying to Bennett College, what do you do with my money? And what we're going to start telling parents is that you can be assured that she will graduate from Bennett College prepared to go into a competitive graduate program or the viable workforce, and she's not coming back to your house.
Dr. Cooper.
I'm not sure how many of you have looked at the Howard University over the last 2 weeks. The Board of Trustees and the President have said our tuition is not going to increase next year. They've already posted tuition for 2015, 2016. So what they're telling students is that we're going to give you the same quality degree with these programs without increasing our tuition. Other thing that they've said as a part of the model, if you graduate on time, we're going to give you a refund of what you paid to us. So, I mean, there are really different ways of looking at business, but I think if you also look at this, there have been some reductions in faculty who may not be needed for majors that are offered at the university. So you have to be optimistic, but you also have to understand where your strength is. You have to understand where there's an opportunity. And if you can look at your strengths and opportunity, you may restructure some of your degree programs in order to provide a new major to students with the faculty and the courses that you have. You may call it something different, but it provides an opportunity. And it lets parents and students know on the front end that if I attend this university, here's what the cost's going to be. You're going to graduate in 4 to 6 years. You're going to get a refund, and we're going to help you get a job. So, I mean, what else can you do to show that HBCUs are still strong and viable, and they're relevant when you look at the communities that we're serving?
Administratively, you have to be proactive as opposed to reactive.
Reactive.
And when you stop and think about, you talked about computer science, I think, and the fact that you had one faculty member, you had 2 graduates. Very often, we have not proactively looked at what do we have on our roster of majors we offer. And some of them we've offered since 1865. If we're going to offer some new ones, something has to change. And you have to have not one person, but a group of people out there looking at. I can remember thinking about art, and I graduated from a liberal arts institution. I love art, I love music. But how many students are we graduating? But what else is out there that you could take that art program and combine with computer science so you can do some of your gaming, some of these other things? There are different ways to look at it, that you can come up with some different things that will generate money for you that can be used in a different way. And what you need to do, you might not be able to keep every faculty member, but sometimes you can retool the faculty members you have to use in different ways.
We have to close, coming to an end of a fantastic discussion, but we wanted to leave time for closing remarks for all the presidents on this panel. And what I want to do, starting with Dr. Cooper, is ask all of our presidents in a minute, if it's possible or so, to give us the takeaway. Not only have we had a dynamic discussion here, those of us who were at the luncheon, we had an hour pre-discussion where we really got into the meat of some of the critical issues. Dr. Cooper, and moving on to my right, can you give us a takeaway in a minute of what is critically important that you have gained and understood and thought of as we've talked today?
Well, I think as I look at HBCUs, we have to look at measures and benchmarks that allow HBCUs to improve their programs and their business model so they can be successful as we look at future years and future challenges.
Dr. Poe.
I think nearly all of us are experiencing a downturn in enrollment. We've all talked about how great we are, but I want to suggest to you that the number one threat we have, all HBCUs, if we could turn it around, we have lost good 90% of black students who normally are the ones who have attended our institution. We have lost the parents who now enjoy chest expansion because their kids are going to a white institution. Even if it costs double the amount of money, there seems to be some reluctance to, even if we market, as Dr. Sias talked, if we market what we are doing across HBCUs, coming together to say, hey, world, this is what HBCUs are doing. How do we get our black students coming out of high school to understand and appreciate the importance of HBCUs? And at least if you're making a decision to go to college, you got 5 colleges on the table, have 2 of them HBCUs. That is the challenge we have, I think, is bringing people home.
I'm glad you talked about parents, because I want to acknowledge that I have one of my parents here.
Okay.
Her daughter Amber Gill is just a phenomenal student at Bennett College. But what I'm trying to do is, and I said to Mickey, once I realized how many master's programs he has, is that I really am pushing for our graduates to consider and apply to graduate programs at HBCUs. This is the way we keep that cycle moving and running through. This is a pipeline that we need to, so when I say they're graduating, going to competitive programs, I mean like at Bowie State.
By the way, your parent is wearing Cheney blue.
No, she's wearing Bennett blue. That's Bennett blue, because look at those pearls.
Dr. Sias.
Well, I'm gonna, as the last person, I'm gonna take a little prerogative. I can't see Dr. Burnham, you well over there in the shadows. But let me say congratulations to you and your faculty, staff, and most especially your students on celebrating 150 years. You did well and you learned by picking a good moderator.
Yeah, he sure did.
My takeaways are these, and I want you to remember that this institution has delivered on the promise of opportunity. As you go forth and you want to remain alive, remember these 5 things. Academic excellence has to be key. You've made huge steps. It still needs to remain number 1. L is for leadership development. Your faculty, your staff, and most especially your students. I is for constantly improving the environment. We're in an example of this today. V is visibility of achievement, making sure others know what it is that you're doing. And E is give always exemplary customer service. I heard Dr. Massey say once, those who fail to learn the lessons of history are doomed to repeat them.
Absolutely.
You're smart. We went to the University of Wisconsin at Madison at the same time. So we know how not to make the same mistake twice. And audience, to you, never fail to assign yourself. Don't sit back and wait to be told what to do. This is your school. This is the lives of future generations. Step up and take the lead.
Amen.
At this time, I want to thank Dr. Burnham, Dr. Nelson, and the entire leadership team here at Bowie State University. On behalf of diverse issues in higher education, it has been a pleasure. And please join me in giving a round of applause for our outstanding panel today. Dr. Burnham.
Thank you. Is it on? Thank you. I was afraid you were going to let people walk away before I had a chance to summarize, which was my assignment for this. Thank you all for that very enlightening discussion. You shared a lot of good ideas. I liked your summaries. People just heard those. I won't repeat those. What I will do is to highlight just 3 or 4 things that I heard you say as you were going through, takeaways for me, which I think are an important part of this. First, in talking about the challenge and the issues that HBCUs face. You talked rather poignantly about leadership and the importance for an institution to make progress in having sustained leadership for a period of time. Too many of our institutions, you said, are challenged by rapid turnover at the top of the institution. And that cannot help but to set back and to hold back the institution's progress. And so that's one of the takeaways for me. The question is, how do you go about supporting your leadership and preventing that kind of rapid turnover? What do we need to do to stabilize the presidencies was the way the question was asked. And I heard you say several things. One, we must have supportive boards, those of us that have individual governing boards. We must have continuous and growing alumni support, both the numbers of alumni who are giving and the amounts that they're giving. And third, you said, you implied, and some of you said directly, is that we need greater campus cohesion. Let's focus on the mission of the institutions and work together on that, understanding that there will be times when we will have disagreements. But for the good of the institution, you said we should try to keep those disagreements in-house, in the family, and work them out. And then the last thing that you said, and that I heard you agree on, is that we need, for the future, an appropriate business model. And so we all need to examine the business models under which we are operating, determine whether or not they are viable for the future, and make the tweaks, do the changes that are necessary to ensure that long-term viability. You did a wonderful job. Thank you very much. This was recorded in addition to being live streamed, and so many people across the country will be able to benefit from your insights. Thank you very much, and thank you, audience, for being here today.
I think they want us for a picture before we